Hi, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for stopping by. This week's project, I am finally going to organize my turning tools. So I've got 24 chisels here that I would use most commonly, probably 8 of them very frequently, and then when I'm doing resin there's another 5 or 6 I would use quite commonly. But I do use these 24 chisels off and on, so I want them in a place where I can get at them quickly. Got a shelf over there beside my lathe, but there's a window behind the shelf, so there's no wall space to hang a rack for chisels on it. So I'm going to build a carousel that sits on top of that shelf. So I'm going to start out here by laying out the base. I'm going to use these 2 pieces of 3/4 inch birch plywood for the very bottom. This piece that's got all the circles on it, I've laid out, it is the bottom of the bottom. And what you'll see here, there's a line for the very outside diameter and of the piece, which is 20 inches. The next line in is the outside of where the 5 inch and 5/8 diameter holes for the chisels will go. Next one in from that is the center line of where I will drill those inch and 5/8 holes. And of course the inside diameter. The squiggly line part is not going to be affected if I put screws in that to hold it together when I glue it. And then the next ring in here, this is the outside and the inside where the screws go. This Lazy Susan bearing that I bought, which is 12 inch diameter. So that'll be in there. I don't want to get into that with screws either and mess myself up. And then the inside, of course, is where the faceplate will go, because I am going to mount this on the lathe. I'll cut the corners off in the bandsaw, but I am going to true this up on the lathe, and I'm going to use the indexing jig on the lathe to mark out the holes where they're going to fit on this line. So you could use a protractor to do that if you don't have an indexing jig, but I do have one, and I think that's going to be my easiest route. Now the challenge in this obviously is the difference in the sizes of chisels. So this chisel obviously needs a different place to sit or way to sit than, for example, this one. So I'm going to make this a carousel that leans in, so it will be tapered. So I'm thinking I'm going to have obviously the base for all of them the same, and then I'll put a ring that will work on the shorter chisels, and then another ring that will hold the taller chisels where they'll touch bottom and top. So that's my goal. The trick is going to be to get it so that I'm not hitting this ring here. So this one I want to lay in, this one's going to have to go past it. So I'm thinking the top ring is actually going to be a larger diameter than the bottom, but I'm going to figure that out as I go here. So I'm going to glue these together, screw them together, and that's nothing anyone needs to see. It's not very exciting. And I'll round it up in the bandsaw, true it up, and I'll bring it back to show you how I'm laying it out with the indexing jig on the lathe. Okay, so this is the indexing mechanism on my lathe. You can see there are holes here. There's a pin you push. It just locks it in place so that I can mark on the opposite side whatever I want. There's 48 holes on this. Other projects I've done, you see I've got every 4th hole, or 4 hole spacings marked here. So for this project I just need to lock it on a yellow one, go 2 holes, mark it, back to another yellow one. So every 2nd hole in this. This is my diameter for the center of the holes. And I've got a new center mark, so where I put my X on that wasn't exactly where it trued up when I put it on the lathe. So want to get your tool rest height at a height where you know you're going to be on center every time, so I just got to lower this just a little bit. Right there. Alright, and then kind of get an idea of what angle your pencil's at, so I know that I'm good here. Okay, so we're all marked now. Remember to pull your indexing pin out so that you don't start your lathe with that in on the next go around. The other thing that's important to remember is take the brad on your tailstock and get an actual center point. Again, this was just for rough purposes to lay it out so I had an idea where my screws go. This is the actual center of this piece now. So when I drill my hole for the center pillar that's going to go in this will be the hole that I use. I'm probably going to drill it on the lathe anyhow. Maybe I'll do it in the drill press, not sure, but important to have a center hole. So I got a piece of yellow birch, it's laminated between centers here. I decided that I'm going to need to go with 3 tier instead of 2. So I have the shorter chisels, the mid-range chisels, and the tall ones. And so all I'm doing here is I'm making the diameter of the bottom section 2.5 inches. And for the second section, I'm going to come in 1/8 of an inch and make it 2 3/8. And then for the top section, I'm going to come in another 1/8 of an inch and make it 2 1/4. And then I'm going to turn a 2-inch tenon. I've got 1.5 inches of plywood at the base, and so I'm going to make 1.5 inches long tenon, 2 inches in diameter. Okay, and I didn't put the tenons on camera, but I did put a tenon top and bottom. So there's a 2-inch tenon going on the bottom at 1.5 inches long, and a 2-inch tenon going on the top at 3/4 of an inch, which matched the thickness of the plywood, one thickness of plywood, which is going on the top. So there will be 3 of these. Now I'm making these really precise because I want them to be a real nice tight fit. Okay, so I went around and put a punch hole in every one of the drill holes I need to drill. It's just a pilot for the brad tip. I've got the depth of my drill press set so that when it's at the bottom, it will be down the thickness of 1 layer of plywood. So I'm just going to show drilling a couple holes here to save time. It's the same repetition over and over for 24 holes. I left 1/8 of an inch between the edge of the circle that I'm drilling and the edge of the base. In hindsight, I would have left probably another 1/8 of an inch. So I would leave a 1/4 inch on the outside. It's fine this way, but I would have left an extra a little bit more on the outside. So I've got my base drilled now. I've got my center post done. Everything is just a friction fit. So I made it so that each one of these discs that I put on it for the different height chisels will friction fit down over. I did make a template to make sure that everything fit nice and snugly, and it's really good. So this is the bottom side of what is going to be the top ring. So I need to make the top ring first and work my way down. And all I did was I took one of my larger chisels, set it in one of the spots in the bottom, decided where I wanted, how much lean I wanted to those, and then, and this is it on the outside of it here, I'm going to put the notch in. Then I put a circle to where I want the back of the chisel. So I'm going to make a notch that will go back to this line. So before this line was the center drill line, and in this case it's going to be this line that I sand back to. And I'm not going to drill these because that'll just be a splintering mess. So I'm going to use the oscillating spindle sander. You can do that with a jigsaw, you can do it however you choose to do it. I'm going to use an oscillating spindle sander to make mine. And I'm not going to make a notch for them all, because if I require different size chisels eventually down the road, I'll have these lines on the underside. This is the top. These lines will be here if I ever need to go back and redo it later. So I'm going to make the ones that I need, which are for 4 chisels right now, on the oscillating spindle sander. So once I've decided what the angle I wanted on those top chisels was, which I like right there now, I made the top ring first and set it in, lined it up, set the chisels in, got a measurement on the face of this next tier, which again, these are all stepped. So this is a 2 1/4 inch. So I measured out, added the radius of the shaft, the 1 1/8 there to this distance, and then I doubled it and made this disc that size. So I've got enough clearance here now. So I'm good. So my long chisels won't hit this one. What I do have an issue with is that I do have some mid-range chisels that are long enough that they're just going to touch in here. So I've had to make a couple extra notches on that. And all that I'm doing to these, I'm rough cutting them on the bandsaw. Again, this one was a 2-inch shaft, so I drilled a 2-inch hole, put it on the 4-jaw chuck of my lathe, expanded it, cut the edge to the diameter that I wanted, marked the bottom side with the index the same as I did on this one, which I showed. So this one has a 2 1/4 inch center hole drilled, same thing on the 4-jaw chuck, expanded, cut to the right size, and this one is going to be a 2 3/8. So I'll do that, and I'll put the indexing lines are underneath again in case I ever have to go back afterwards and add more. The lines are already there, so I know where things will line up. So I'm going to take this one off, and I did actually wind up just rough cutting these with the scroll saw. Nothing exciting to see there. Like I say, there's a zillion ways you can cut this out. Just took it on the scroll saw, and then I took it over to the oscillating spindle sander and just finished it up a little bit neater. Okay, so I have the last disc here. So all I'm doing is I'm just mounting, and I've drilled the hole. This one was 2 3/8, which is the size of the shaft that this one slides down over. So I'm just going to put this on my 4-jaw chuck and expand it. to hold it. Then all I'm going to do is just trim this outside to the line that I had drawn, which is on the back side, which is just in a little bit here. So I'm going to trim it up with a carbide chisel, which cuts plywood better than the traditional ones, and it doesn't give me any tear out. And then I'll mark, again, I'll put the marks on it the same as we did in the base, and that's all that I'm doing to make these. And I'll show you how I'm cutting them out on the scroll saw and the sanding of the notches here in a bit. I'll show you just a rough cutting of some of these notches, just a couple of them. Again, all repetitious, but they are very rough. I'm just trying to take the bulk of the material out of the center because the oscillating spindle sander is really good at cleaning that up and making the right side. These are all just done freehand. That's certainly accurate enough for this application. There were a couple chisels that were a little bit wider, a couple gouges and scrapers, so I made a few of these wider than. So I made these so that they, again, were really tight tolerances so that I could have a good friction fit and put this together loosely. And you can see I can turn it, but it doesn't turn very easily on its own. So I did that so that I could put everything in here and do a double check to make sure everything was sitting straight and that nothing was hitting on the shelf underneath of it. Okay, so I've got everything in here now where it's going to sit, and chisels are sitting nice, nothing's hitting on anything, they're all pretty straight, and I've got enough clearance here. Now I made these, if you'll notice, I made these probably a little bigger than I needed to, but these chisels, not this one, but these chisels here are going to be replaced. So the reason I made the extra slots here is whenever you replace them, they may actually be taller chisels that wind up fitting in here. And if that's the case, I'm all set. So now I'm just going to mark. I've got this so that the chisels are standing straight. So I'm just going to put a mark on the pedestal and then out onto the plate so I know where my alignment is. So I'm putting an alignment line on each of the top 3 discs so I know where they go. I'm not going to put any glue on the bottom. It's got an 1.5 inch long tenon on it, and it is sitting nice and tight into that base. And so I'm going to leave that without glue. So I'm going to take this all back apart now and put these discs back on one at a time and glue them in. So to screw this onto the base, there's bigger holes here which allow you to access the holes that are in the top ring. So you just have to put a screw in and then turn the bottom till you come to another screw hole. And that's all that needs to be done to do that. I'm not going to screw this down on my table. If I were going to screw it down to the table, I would drill the table and put machine screws through it. But this isn't going to go anywhere, so it's going to be good and stable. And this is why I draw all those lines on there at the first. It would be very difficult to do after the fact. I just ran a bead of glue around the pedestal at each level, one at a time. Put the bead of glue on, then put the shelf on, the disc on, and then went to the next one and did the next bead of glue. So folks are going to ask what diameter I made each shelf, and really it's not going to be relevant unless you had exactly the same chisels as I do. So like I showed at the beginning, you put your tallest ones on first, and then you measure the distance that will clear the handles of the tall ones, and you make the next disc that diameter accordingly. And you may only need 2 discs, you might need 1, you might need 4, depending on what you use for tools. So there is no one size fits all here. You really have to custom build it for the chisels that you have and the shelf space you have to set it on. So basically how this worked out for me is I took my maximum diameter that I could fit a base on my shelf comfortably, and then I took the number of chisels I want to put into it, Multiplied the number of chisels by 1 5/8, took the circumference of where the center line of those chisels were going to be to ensure that I'd have enough circumference to have a space between each chisel so they would fit in this thing properly. And once I had that established, then it was just a matter really, like you saw, of starting at the top, sorting your chisels out by length, and then working from the top down. So here's the finished product all set into place. Really happy with how this turned out. I got a little spot on the top shelf there now to put my Hampshire Sheen, my Yorkshire grit, some hot wax, and my sanding sealer, and a pencil, which I'm always looking for. So this is a much more efficient space now for me. If you're still with me, thanks so much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone who watches the videos and subscribes to the channel. I appreciate that a ton as well. And if you like what you saw and you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. And we will see you next time.